Hey, brother.
Hey Al, how's it going?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Great.
Yeah.
And welcome everyone back to another episode of Siblings in Crime. I'm Allie Rosso.
And I'm Blake Murphy.
And just as it sounds, we are siblings who love true crime.
Love it.
Yes. And we're back this week. And like always, before we get into our case, Blake, how was your week?
My week was great. It was good. One thing that was actually awesome about my week was hanging out on Sunday, watching the Masters. I'm not a big golf guy. I
I
like
was about to
golf,
say,
but yeah, it was cool. I mean, I was going for Bryson and he kind of fell apart, but whatever.
can't do anything about it.
Yeah, Rory's kind of annoying. I don't like him that much, so it's kind of sad, but happy
Mm,
for him too at the same time.
that's very nice of you. I don't know a thing. I don't know anyone's names or anything, but I'm glad you're able
Yeah,
to watch it.
thanks. Thanks. All my friends are talking about it, so I just decided to watch it.
That makes sense. Good reason for it.
Yeah.
Well, this week for me was great.
Oh
Not
yeah,
that
how
you
was your
asked.
week?
Not that you asked. I'll tell you about it though. This week, I don't know. I had a lot of fun. I feel like we are working on building our house. So we met with the appliance people. We met with the flooring people. I thought it was a lot of fun actually. So
Nice.
that was great. And it was funny because Brett and I are obviously working on our podcast this weekend. And we're talking about trying to get a studio in our future home. Anyway, so hopefully we have future good things coming.
Yeah.
But obviously, I always talk about Brett's podcast. It's called Getting After It. He now has Substack, his website, Keep Getting After It. So Brett's doing all the things. And it's been fun to see him do his podcast and us do ours.
hmm
But also, it was fun. I already told you about it, but it's fun to just say is that I was flying from Provo to Utah this weekend, and I met Peyton Moreland, who is the host of Murder with My Husband.
That's
And so it was
sick.
like super
Big fans
fun.
right here. Big
I know.
fans.
I was like, we listen to her podcast, that and Into the Dark, every week. So I
Yeah.
said hi and I felt bad because I'm like, that's probably annoying. But we ended up sitting right across each other, across the aisle. And we talked the entire flight. And I was like, she was so nice. And I was so happy she was so nice because I was like, I listened to her every week. And so it was nice to know that she's like really cool and stuff. So,
Yeah.
anyways, that was fun. And then it was funny because we went out and found our husbands. And so I met Garrett and their dog. And, anyways, Daisy was a cute little pup. So it was fun. And this week is Holy Week. So
hmm
excited because I love Jesus. Do you have any
Yes.
Easter plans?
Nope. I'm flying probably.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm excited. It'll be nice to be with family, in-laws, I guess, because you're gonna be
hmm
gone. But anyway, so great time to think about Jesus.
hmm
And that's really all I had this week, but I thought it was fun.
Nice.
Yeah, but this week's case haunts me for many reasons. Biggest being I literally have nightmares about this exact situation all the time, no joke. All cases are sad, but something hits a little bit deeper when it's a random act of violence, especially in a place that you're supposed to feel your safest, being your
In your
home.
bed.
In your bed. You nailed it. Exactly. And I think as I was writing this story, I think it's because of when we were kids, when we were children, our house alarm went off. I'm scared out of my mind.
We
I
were
run
small
to
kids.
yeah, with
Yeah.
small kids. I run to my parents' bed, jump in. I'm like crying already. Little did I know, Blake was sleeping on the floor and he jumps up out of nowhere. I best about peed my pants. It scared me so bad because I thought he was an intruder. And I think that's probably why I have these haunting dreams to this day. I mean, I'm sure
Probably.
it's a fear for everyone, but I think that's where it stems from. So,
Yeah, and our alarm would go off almost every day, every week, because my dad would just walk outside, not
I
forgetting he put the alarm on at like 4 in the morning, and we think that someone's breaking in.
I know. And I felt like that was a regular occurrence. He
Mm.
had like started and then you hear him like running to the alarm thing, turn it off.
Yeah.
So I think that's where my fear of intrusion began. And so let me set the scene for this case. In the serene town of Mount Vernon, uh, New Hampshire. I literally don't know anything about that place, but a
Sounds
horrific
like a
crime.
fake place to me.
Me
It
too.
seems, it feels fake. That in Connecticut.
That's true. No one's in Connecticut.
and New England, or not New England, Maine.
Maine's
Yeah.
beautiful, actually.
Anyways, keep going. Sorry.
Well, anyways, in Mount Vernon, a horrific crime shattered the tranquility and left a permanent mark on the community. So on October 4th, 2009, Kimberly Cates and her 11-year-old daughter, Jaimie, were sleeping peacefully until early in the morning when they were wakened by the sound of glass breaking. Before they had time to process or even get out of bed, Kim and Jaimie were screaming out of pain as they were getting brutally attacked during a home invasion.
Ooh.
So, today we will dive into the lives of the victims and the perpetrators, exploring the chilling events leading up to the fateful night and the aftermath that followed. So, this is the Cates family story and how a group of teenagers who called themselves the Disciples of Destruction changed their lives forever.
Oh,
You ready?
spooky. Disciples of Destruction.
I hate it.
It's like a cult.
Just about. You ready? All
Yep, I'm ready.
right, let's roll. So let's start, like I said, in Mount Vernon. This was a kind of place that felt like the little secret kept away from reality. It was tucked into the wooded hills. It wasn't a place that was ever in the headlines. It was the kind of place where families went to get away from traffic, from crime, from noise, all things. It was away. And I feel like we say that in every case. I'm like, are all cases in like these like rural small towns? And then I was like, how big is this? It's 35,000 is the population. I had no idea if that was big or small. So
Hmm.
I guess like small cities is typically from 50 to 100,000. So evidently this was like super small, away from everything. And in fact, their motto, I guess, is live free or die, which
Jeez.
is, and I would say, which is like, oh, yay, hippie, but also that is going to be really cruel irony as we get into this case. But this exact free spirit, independent, beautiful life was exactly what the Kimberly and David Cates had been searching for. Originally from Tennessee, Kimberly had grown up surrounded by Southern hospitality. They had church potlucks, the kind of warmth that makes like your house feels like a home. And she carried that with her through nursing, and that's where she met her husband, David. He was like a quiet, intelligent man with a dry wit and fierce love for his family. They married and they ended up having the daughter, and her name was Jaimie. So there's going to be our focus of today's story. And this is like what they went to this place for safety, but that's obviously not what they left with. The house on Trow Road wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. It was nice. Surrounded by trees and tucked away from the main road, Jaimie had her own room, a swing in the backyard, and trails nearby to explore. They made quick friends, and David was often traveling for work. And so this was peace of mind for him because this is the type of place that they left their doors unlocked, everyone's waving at each other, all that good stuff. And he felt comfortable leaving his wife and daughter there. They were best friends. In fact, they talked about how the daughter would often sleep in her mom's bed with her when her dad was out of town. Um, I feel like that's so normal for mother and daughter. And I was like, am I gonna confess this? I'm 27 years old, and like if our husbands aren't in town, me and my mom will sleep in the same sleep in the same bed. Mom
Weirdo.
watches Mr. Ballin every night before bed. I'm like, yeah, I'll watch some show with you. And
Runs
I
in the
think that's
family.
normal. Yeah, I feel like
Not
that's a
not
normal.
sleeping in the bed, but true crime.
Yeah, but we're all watching Mr. Ballin together and listening to podcasts.
Mhm.
So I think that's like really cute. I feel like I felt really that felt really relatable to a lot of mother-daughter relationships. Like I said, this was a fresh start, a quiet life, and it was everything they wanted up until the night that the silence turned deadly. So little did anyone know, not far away from the Kate's little oasis, there was high school teenagers fighting their own personal demons. Long before the name Disciples of Destruction was ever scrawled into a notebook or rumored through the town, there were four boys, pretty normal on the outside, quiet, unassuming, but inside something much darker was growing. So these are like the kind of awkward loner type of kids, but they grew into be more rebellious teenagers as they began to find one another. And it wasn't long until their bond began to grow into more of the raging cult that we mentioned. So I'm going to introduce you to each of these people we have. We have Steven Spader. He is going to be like the ringleader. He is He is the top dog of these four guys. Stephen, he's only 17 years old. He was once an honor student and once a Boy Scout. He was the kind that teachers described him as bright but troubled. His intelligence was undeniable. He could recite obscure military history and memorize full passages from books that he read once. So he was like really bright, but his stare was vacant. They said that he was very absent emotionally, just a very cold type of person. His parents were divorced when he was young, and so he bounced between households. You hear all the normal stuff, but it led to him skipping class, writing violent stories in his notebooks, even. And he told people he didn't believe in mortality. He bragged that someday he would be remembered, not for doing something good, but for doing something that couldn't be forgotten, which makes me hate doing podcasts on guys like this. I'm like, oh, you just want to be famous? I hate that I'm
Yeah.
talking about you.
Yeah. I feel like especially like cult people are like that.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's a lot of the times the type of people that were the isolated type, and now they're like, "You're never gonna forget my name." So it makes me mad that I talk about him. Then we also have Christopher Gribble. So he was kind of the right hand man. He was partner in crime. Gribble was 2 years older. He was 19, but he had emotional maturity of someone like much younger. He was adopted as a baby in a deeply religious family, and his parents were strict, but like discipline strict. Like all the reports made it sound like they were like average strictness, even though Gribble made it sound like they were just Satan themselves. He was stalker type as well. He'd tell classmates he wanted to join the FBI, but the truth was he spent most of his time in his room reading about serial killers, torture methods, and homemade weapons.
Jeez.
So that's a very bad look for someone who is getting into rebellious things. His online
Mhm.
history was a dark spiral. It had fantasies of violence, long rants about being rejected by girls. He even had been accused from two different women that he had touched them inappropriately, and he denies it, but everyone believes that he actually did it. And this is actually one of the reasons that he hates his parents is because they believe the women. And so he already had like a rough relationship with his parents. Then all this happened. So he just has a rough coming up. He also spoke about abuse and revenge and fantasies about cutting his mother into little pieces.
Ew.
That's
These
a
people
horrible.
are troubled guys.
And keep in mind, nothing proved that there was abuse. And when he was like asked further about this abuse, he literally described chores. He's like, she would make me vacuum. I wasn't allowed to hang out with my friends. She would pop my zits. I was like,
Ew.
ooh, I know. Nothing worse. So you can
Yeah.
tell that he was definitely troubled and took on the victim mentality. Along those two, we have William Marks and Quinn Glover. These two guys were more the drifter, the watcher. They're 18 and 17 years old. They were more in the backgrounds. They weren't violent people, but they're more the followers. They're looking for companionship, friendship, belonging. And so these are our four guys: Steven Spader, Christopher Gribble, William Marks, and Quinn Glover. These four make up the Disciples of Destruction.
Jeez.
So it all began like kind of as a joke, it sounds like kind of like a club name that they just like scribbled down in a notebook. But Steven Spader called himself the Supreme Commander and then started making missions for these four boys. He would have them have burglary and arson and had on the list eventually
Dang.
murder. So these guys, not that they're like going out, I think, and doing all these things like right away, but I think they're like playing into this fantasy that they're like on these missions and that they have to do a certain amount of things, kind of like initiation.
Yeah. It and it and like when you said things to do, I was thinking like small things, but like burger robbing someone, I couldn't say it for some reason.
Burglary.
Burglary and arson, that's pretty big. It's like burglary and then murder.
Right. Kind of a stretch. They started small, like breaking into empty homes, which I feel like is still pretty big, but okay. They stole meaningless things, but Spader wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. He wanted blood. To him, murder wasn't crime, it was a performance. And so he saw it as this act, which is
Deep.
so disturbing.
Yeah.
He told the group that they needed to prove themselves, that the only way to become true disciples was to kill a person, any person, at random, fast, brutal. And so Gribble didn't hesitate. Marks and Glover were a little more hesitant, but they were silent. And so the plan was born. One night, one house, whoever was inside, no mercy. The house on Trow Road sat quiet beneath the trees, a small, secluded, ranch stylish house surrounded by woods and darkness. Inside, we had Kimberly Cates, 42. She lay sleeping in bed beside her 11-year-old daughter, Jaimie. Her husband, David, was out of town on a business trip. The stillness was deceptive. Outside, four teenage boys, Stephen Spader, Christopher Gribble, William Marks, and which William goes by Billy a lot. So if I say Billy, same guy,
Mhm.
Gwen and Gwen Clover, stood under the cover of night, cloaked in black, faces hidden, hearts racing. They didn't pick just like they didn't pick this house by accident. It's actually kind of weird. They had driven around looking for a house to intrude, and they had picked one out a couple days in advance. But come the night of, they get there and like this house is too big. There's potentially too many people in there, and they end up just going down the street to a neighbor. And this is how they chose the Cates family. They saw that there was only a single light left on inside, and there were no cars in the driveway. And so this was the house they settled on, which is just bad luck.
Yeah. It's yeah, like you said, it's really spooky when there's no motive. It's
Yeah.
just they randomly picked that one because the other one wasn't they didn't want to do the other one.
Right. Obviously, we don't want them doing any house. Like, it's nothing that the family did. At 4 a.m., roughly, Spader lifted a large landscaping rock and hurled it through a glass panel in the back door. The shatter echoed like gunfire across the quiet woods, but no lights turned on. So, with gloved hands, he reached through the broken glass to unlock the door, and just like that, they were inside. Spader led the way down the hall, machete in hand, with Gribble
Jeez.
following closely behind with his weapon of choice, a hunting knife. The other two boys followed Spader and Gribble into the house, but hesitated as they approached the bedroom. The leaders, Gribble and Spader, they entered the master bedroom with no apprehension. As they entered the master bedroom, Kimberly and Jaimie were asleep, but slowly rolling awake. I mean, they just heard glass shatter, and Kim, supposedly groggily from her sleep, called out and said, "Jaimie, is that you?" And without hesitation, Spader struck first, and once he started, he couldn't stop. According to testimony from the New Hampshire State Medical Examiner, Kimberly Cates was hit at least 36 times.
Wow.
The, the machete carved into her head, neck, chest, and arms, and several of the wounds were defensive, indicating that she tried to protect herself and her daughter, which is heart
That's sad.
wrenching. Heart wrenching. One blow shattered her arm. Others split deep into bone. The wounds were so extreme that the examiner later called the attack savage and excessive.
Jeez.
Without hesitation, Gribble joined in. He stabbed Kimberly and then turned to Jaimie. The little girl screamed, trying to shield herself and her mother, but Gribble slashed across the chest and face, puncturing her lung, and stabbed her in the abdomen. At one point, he stood over her and asked, "Are you still alive?" Like, I guess he was just trying to murder her. And the fact that he recalls asking her that is so sickening.
Hmm.
And he asked right before he drove the knife into her chest once again.
Jeez.
Jaimie laid there perfectly still and quiet next to her dying mom. The boys raffled. The boys rifled through the house, grabbing jewelry, box. Like they ended up robbing the house. Everything that they pawned for $130. I'm like, oh,
Jeez.
woohoo, $130 for this.
Yeah.
From what we have on the accounts, only Gribble and Spader were in the master bedroom, but all four participated in the robbery. And in advance, they had even shut off their circuit breakers or whatever, all the things to make sure the lights didn't come on. So they had this well planned out in advance and left the house with no more than $130 to pawn off. But as the silence returned, Jaimie dragged herself out of bed. She had faked death to escape its horrible grasp, and it worked. With intruders gone, she knew her and her mom needed help immediately. And so, bleeding with her lung collapse and wounds across her face and chest, she made the phone call to 911. Jaimie, gasping, told dispatch something to the effect that I think my mom is dead and I've been stabbed. Ah, can't imagine. Dispatchers' jobs are so hard. I couldn't be able to handle that. When first responders arrived, they found Kimberly Cates lifeless in bed, having bled out from her injuries, which is shocking that she lasted that long. I thought it was going to be more like immediate death if you're getting attacked by a machete, but obviously she was fighting for her life. That what took her in the end was blood loss. Jaimie was rushed to the hospital and underwent emergency surgery. Miraculously, she actually survived. And this is obviously something that the disciples did not plan on and happening. What she described to the police would lead to one of the most disturbing investigations in New Hampshire history. The hours after the murder were a blur of flashing lights, sirens, and urgent phone calls. The small town of Mount Vernon had never seen anything like this. I mean, 35,000 people there.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
almost nobody.
Yeah.
Probably no crimes or almost
Yeah.
none. To have
Ex-
like that bad of a murder is crazy.
and random.
Yeah, and scary. It's
Yeah,
like
Susan.
not that many people there to like, it could happen to you.
Exactly. And I feel like the investigators always are trying to tell the public, like, no
It's a
one else is
one-off.
in danger,
Yeah,
But if it's like a random murderer, like, no one's safe.
yeah.
But even in the chaos, investigators were already piecing together what had happened. On Jamie's 911 call, the dispatcher had asked her if she knew who had attacked her. She said she didn't know, but she knew there was two men and one had a machete. That was actually the first clue detectives needed to start their investigation. Like, who just has a machete?
I don't
But
know. I feel like a lot of people might have a
what?
machete. I don't know really know what their town is like, but if it's a small town, you're probably using a machete to clear off like your backyard all the time and no?
I guess I don't know
That
anything
sounds
about that
stupid.
area. I don't know. I don't know what
I
tools
kind of
you would use for
imagined it
that.
as like a woodsy area and like you like use it to, clear out your backyard and I don't know.
Doesn't
Maybe
make
I'm
sense.
just
I
thinking
really
about El
don't know what the
Salvador.
purpose. Yeah. And I guess I don't really know the purpose of a machete. Like in
Just to,
day-to-day life.
yeah, cut branches. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, then maybe it's not super unlikely. Just in Arizona and Utah, I have no use for a machete.
Yeah, same.
Surprisingly, this did start pointing investigators in the right direction, though. Police and crime scene investigators moved quickly, securing the area. They found Kimberly's body lying in the master bedroom, blood everywhere, and like we said, her body marked with over 36 machete strikes. The brutality of the scene was unlike anything they have ever seen before. As investigators canvassed the area, they began to uncover details that would lead them to Spader and Gribble.
Wait a
One of the
second.
first,
Just what I was gonna. Oh no, I was gonna say. I feel like as an investigator, the hardest thing would be to try to find someone who like did a random act of violence. And like the only way I feel like you could figure it out is like video evidence or like DNA. It's like there's like the only way you can connect them.
that's a good point. Yeah, because it's like there's no motive, there's no
Yeah,
one in their life connecting.
yeah, it's not like you can go through their bank statements and be like, oh, the husband is sending money to some girl. He's probably, you know, killed the wife so he could be with the girl or something like that. It's like, oh yeah, random people just decide to go into that house. If there's not DNA and not video, then how do you figure that out? So
Right. No, that's a really good point. And that's actually initially what the investigators were afraid of. But as thought out as this crime seemed to have been at first, they were pretty sloppy. And they left behind evidence perfectly for investigators to find. First thing they found was one of the most important pieces of evidence was a flashlight at the scene. The flashlight, which had been dropped near the entry point of the house, and it was engraved. Could you ever guess what was engraven upon this flashlight?
oh, the initials?
Even better, property of Stephen Spader.
Oh yeah.
I
Got them.
was like, you
Maybe
cannot
that's
beat
the
that.
other thing that they need, not just DNA, I guess.
Well,
Someone
that's the
dropping
thing,
a engraven flashlight.
right? Which obviously was like a huge break. Like, okay, who's Steven Spader? Which is honestly so frustrating because you see something like that, and for us, it's like obvious guilt, you know.
Mhm.
But for investigators, they have to have a lot more than a flashlight at a scene.
Yeah, and it's also like they probably can't ask the people, is like this someone you know? Because they're probably in surgery and traumatized and everything. They probably have to maybe ask the husband or something, but
Mm-hmm.
it's probably not as easy. It could be just like a neighbor that left their flashlight there or something when they were helping. So,
Right. So they knew they had to bring these guys in right away to find out, like, why would your flashlight be at the scene of the crime? Public details of how police kept closing in on Ribble and Spader were pretty scarce. But what we do know is that along with the flashlight, there were actual cameras in the area that caught their car on
let's
surveillance.
go.
Yeah. And they found the group loitering, hanging around the Cates residence at the time of the murder. Most telling of all, though, is that many witnesses, including friends and family, claim that Chris and Stephen were bragging that they had committed a murder and had even threatened them if they said anything that they would murder them too. I don't know why people do that.
Yeah.
I'm
Well, it's good
grateful.
for us. It's
Yeah, exactly.
good for the good guys.
Exactly. And I think
I
it
think the
just
bad
goes to
guys are
show,
stupid a lot of times.
yeah, stupid and like ignorant, or not ignorant, arrogant and
Yeah.
ignorant. But
Narcissistic.
yeah, for sure. You know, these guys just want their names out there so bad, so
Yeah.
desperate for attention in this case. It's disgusting. Less than 40,
Revolting.
revolting. I'm gonna
I'm just
throw up.
kidding.
Less than 48 hours after the attack, law enforcement arrested Steven Spader and Christopher Gribble. The two were known to have been involved in violent youth subculture, I guess is what they called it, but investigators hadn't yet definitively been able to say they were guilty, even with all this evidence.
I always wonder how like the cops know. It's like, oh yeah, they've been known to do this stuff. Like, were they arrested before or like they on like sketchy websites and stuff that the cops like trace or I always kind of wonder how they like know. Like, oh yeah, these people have been, you know, known by the FBI or the police for, stuff like that. Just I always kind of wondered.
I'm sure a little bit of both. I mean, especially with such a small town, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
like such a small police department. They're like, if one person gets in minor trouble, they know about it.
Yeah, I wonder if they were like they have a police record from like, you know, doing like the little things they were doing in the beginning, and
Hmm.
so
For sure. Just like
didn't
familiar a
say
little
that,
bit
but
with them.
maybe. Yeah.
There's a chance. So, of course, they go into interrogation. Gribble in his police interview initially denied any involvement, and he adamantly would say that he would never touch a lady. And it bothered me so bad listening to him repeatedly say he respects women, he would never touch them, just because of how brutal this murder was. But as the detectives methodically laid out the evidence, the surveillance footage, phone records, and the items found at the crime scene, he eventually began to crack. After a little break from a 7 hour long interrogation, Gribble called in the investigator and told him to grab his recorder. He's ready to talk, which
Oh.
I don't know if I've heard that before. Hey, investigator comes in. Hey, actually, go back out, grab your recorder. Let's get this thing going.
Yeah, he's like, well, everything's recorded, so.
Right. At one point, he talks about how he didn't know what capital murder was. He didn't know if the death penalty would be on the line. And so might as well just confess to everything because no matter what, he's screwed. He goes on to give this confession. I was going to quote him, but I thought I would have him tell you himself in his own words. This audio comes from, it's called Dave's Lemonade on YouTube.
Mm.
So I'm going to put that in.
I was controlled, but I didn't really feel much of anything.
Yeah, okay.
I thought I would, but I didn't.
What were Quinn and Billy doing?
They stayed by the door. They didn't do anything. Oh, honesty. We did everything. The girl jumped up. I almost sensed her in the dark get up. and jumped over her mother as Steve was hacking away, and she jumped right into my arms. I stabbed her once towards the face. I hit bone. I felt the knife skip off and didn't go in. Then I went for the front. I stabbed her somewhere around the front right chest area. I tried to twist her around so I could get a better shot at her heart. It was automatic. I didn't even think about it. I automatically did it. Yeah. I stabbed her a couple times in the back as I was swinging her around, and she got free of my hand and went flying into the glass door, knocked her head. Stopped crying completely. Okay. I figured she was probably toast. Yeah.
So from Gribble's own words, he has confessed to being a participant in murdering Kim Cates and attempted murder of her daughter, Jaimie. In the months that followed, as Gribble and Spader awaited trial, their chilling lack of remorse became more apparent. Both men seemed like unfazed by the violence they had committed. And in November of 2010, just over a year after the brutal murder of Kimberly Cates, Steven Spader stood trial. He's 18 now at this point, so he's no longer juvenile, and he wants the world to know exactly who he is. Blech. I hate that. He shows no remorse. He rejects the plea deal, and he pleads not guilty to first-degree murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy.
Let me guess. He wants to represent himself.
No, luckily. Good guess. That would be very fitting for his personality, it seems.
Yeah.
The trial goes on. The evidence is like so piled high that it takes no effort for the trial it didn't last long at all. I think it was like barely a week. So on November 9th of 2010, Steven Spader was found guilty of first-degree murder for killing Kimberly Cates, attempted murder for the attack on Jaimie Cates, also conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit burglary, witness tampering, and felonious use of a deadly weapon. In court, Jaimie Cates herself, she's now only 12 years old, so tiny. Her voice, quiet but steady, she looks directly at Spader and as she recounts what happened that night. Obviously, the jury saw her scars, heard her story, and without question, they knew that they made the right decision. And he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 76 years.
Nice.
The judge, I'm her biggest fan. She is Judge Judy in this case.
Mom's biggest supporter.
Yeah, mom loves Judge Judy.
Yeah.
Judge Gillian Amberson's words during sentencing left no doubt about how she felt. She said, quote, I could go on for days and days and days about the depth of your depravity. She said, but it is sufficient to say that you belong in a cage. For that reason, I am sentencing you to consecutively to the maximum penalties to ensure that you stay in that cage for the rest of your pointless life.
Oh.
I know. I was like, let's go. I was all on board for that. I'm like, you tell him how it is. He doesn't flinch after the sentencing, and he turns to the courtroom and says, I have no remorse and no regret.
Jeez.
Ugh. What a horrible, horrible human being.
Yeah.
He's later quoted as saying he wants to go down in history with the names of Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. And I'm like, no, those are bad people. Everyone's bad. But next comes Christopher Gribble. Unlike Spader, well, I guess
what happened to those other two guys?
We're going to talk about them.
I can't remember their names.
Yeah, we'll talk about them in a minute. Christopher Gribble is the next focus because him and Spader were the ones who actually commit the murder.
Yeah.
So similar to Spader, he pleads not guilty, but unlike Spader, he pleads for reason of insanity. He admits to the attack, but claims he was mentally ill. The defense brings in psychologists. They argue he was delusional and sociopathic, unable to understand right from wrong. But the prosecution counters with his detailed planning, his rational decision-making, his confession, his journal. Yeah, his journal, which included, quote, killing people is easier than I thought it would be.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Creepy. Both him and Spader were journal writers, and they just wrote all their feelings up in there in every detail.
I feel like that happens a lot. It's like, why did you write that down?
I'm sure it's like they have to get it out somehow. They're like, I probably shouldn't tell people.
But they did.
Yeah, so they're dumb.
Maybe they told those other two guys.
Yeah.
Is that what's gonna happen? You're gonna tell
The,
me about next?
wait, I tell the other two guys?
No, like those two, like told the other two guys who are just the followers,
Mm.
or
The
they the
other two,
getaway truck drivers.
the other two guys were actually in the house.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead.
You're getting excited.
Hmm.
For Gribble, the jury deliberates for 2 days. On March 25th, 2011, Gribble is also found guilty of the same charges: first degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit burglary, and felonies use of a deadly weapon. He was
Dang.
sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus more than 100 years on other charges. So these guys are
Gee.
going away for life.
Yeah. One second. We need a reaction for that.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
Little balloons.
Yep.
Judge Abramson once again doesn't hold back. And I will say this every day from here on out. She should handle every court case. She says, quote, I believe the record will thoroughly support my belief that infinity is not enough jail time for you.
Dang.
She is a baller. I don't know.
Yeah.
I soaked that up. During his victim impact statement, David Cates, Kimberly's husband and Jaimie's father, looks Gribble in the eye and calls him a worthless coward. As for William Marks and Quinn Glover, the two that you've been asking about,
Yeah.
though they entered the house but only took part in the burglary, they still knew that potentially a murder was going to happen. So they're still held at fault. The plan was to rob the house. If there were people inside, kill them. And they knew the plan. They just didn't partake in the murder portion.
Mm.
Both cut plea deals in exchange for their testimonies. So William Marks, or as they kept calling him Billy, pleads guilty to and is charged with accomplice to secondary murder, accomplice to attempted murder, conspiracy to commit burglary, conspiracy to commit murder, and he is sentenced to 30 to 60 years in prison.
Dang. That's crazy.
Yeah,
It's
I
a
don't
long
know.
time.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm surprised about that or not. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Uh, um, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's a really long time, but he also basically committed murder too, just didn't actually do the murder.
Right. And I was watching the videos of them in court, and I will say the reason I think it's 30, 60 years is on the stand, they are asked, like, are you aware that they went in with these weapons? Do you know that they were attacked? Did you know that they died? Did you try to stop them? And all of them said, like, both boys were like, I made no attempt to stop them.
Yeah.
And so I think because even though they weren't the murderers, they were still involved. They could have been helpful. They weren't. I think that's why it's such a long sentence.
Yeah.
But I was
But they'll
still
probably
actually
be on parole way sooner than that. So,
right, which brings me to Glover. He also pleaded guilty and he was sentenced to 20 to 40 years, which was later reduced to 15 to 30 years. But after a 2024 hearing, so just last year, Glover was granted parole and released under supervision after serving about 14 years.
oh wow.
Yeah, the court cited this decision to the fact that he was cooperative and he was at such a young age. He was only 17 when this all
Mm.
happened.
Yeah.
And so now he's being supervised, but he is no longer in jail. The other three still in jail. The main two, they're there for life.
Yeah.
In the end, all four members of the Disciples of Destruction were sent to jail. Steven Spader is in the maximum security facility. He spends most of his time in solitary confinement. He has made multiple appeals, but obviously none were successful. He had a friend that quoted him saying that the killing was such a high that he would have been surprised if he didn't get addicted.
Dang, that's
I'm like,
crazy.
you have a person that testified that you are potentially going to be addicted to murder and you're trying to get out of jail. Nice try.
Yeah.
Christopher Gribble had said that he had found peace in prison, but he too has tried to appeal his sentence with no success. Thank heavens.
Yeah.
This case, like I said, biggest fear. The crazy thing to me is that I didn't just stumble across this case. I actually chose one specifically because Christopher Gribble is a name we're a little familiar with. Not much is public about his family, and so I'll do my best not to overshare. But long story short, Christopher Gribble, his brother, went to college and was roommates with Brett.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And it's crazy because, like I said, without oversharing, it does seem to be as though these dark fantasies, these really interesting personality traits, do seem to be kind of a Gribble DNA trait. That being said, my father-in-law actually is the one that put all these pieces together and found out like that his brother was a machete murderer, and the brother of Gribble did end up getting the mental help needed, but he was asked to leave the school. And so as far as we don't know what happened to the brother. We don't know where he's at these days. He was
Allegedly.
allegedly, I know, we know for sure. We don't know where he's at. But he was kicked out of the school, and Brett has the craziest stories. And I was like, when we found that out, I was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. And then I obviously now knew about his brother, and that's what led me to this case, which is just so freaky to think that they had all those connections. It's like connections, but it's connections in my eyes.
Yeah.
The red flags were like everywhere. Like, I'm so glad Brett got out of that situation. That's all I have to say about that.
Jeez. All right.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
So that's how we found about the story. Terrifying, but no matter how horrible murder is, I mean, obviously it's terrible. I love a good victim redemption story. I love when victims come out on the other side and they are like ready to show the world like a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Jaimie Cates, who was just 11 years old at the time that she was left for dead, she did more than just survive. She chose to live. 10 years later, she was thriving. She was a public health major and an athlete in field hockey at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She chose to give back and move forward. Her strength, her resilience, and her refusal to be defined by the worst night of her life became her legacy. Her father, David Cates, remained by her side every step of the way. Despite the loss of his wife and the trauma and like the haunting of their situation, David became a rock for his daughter. He actually found love again, sought to rebuild, and most importantly, he worked to ensure Kimberly's memory would live on to be something great. That being said, in the wake of the tragedy, the Kimberly Cates Memorial Scholarship Fund was established. Since then, it has awarded more than $250,000 to students who embodied the kindness, compassion, and strength that defined Kimberly's life. Through these scholarships, Kimberly continues to touch lives, just as she did in every hospital room she worked in as a nurse, every interaction she had, and every moment of her short but radiant life. From what I say we as if we have like editors and helpers, but what I found in my research was that the latest information available was in 2014, and as of then, David Cates and his daughter were actually still living in that exact home that the
I don't know if I could do that.
I know that scares me, but I love
Especially for
what
the
David.
little girl.
Yeah, true. I don't know how she would do it.
Yeah.
I love what David said though, because he describes it as a place that Kimberly loved, and despite the painful memories, they chose to stay, finding comfort in their community and memories of Kimberly. So although obviously it's so horrible, so painful, I think they just felt close to her there. And I thought that was really special. And so as Jaimie once said, quote, "I choose to live every day. I choose to find good in life," end quote.
Nice.
And that is this week's story. All right, so do you have some not so fun facts for me this week?
I do. Maybe some trivia.
Ooh, I'm very bad at with the trivia.
I know you are very bad.
You're so honest. What a brother.
Alrighty, so let's go with this question. What percent of serial killers do you think come from California?
It's got to be a pretty high number. That's such a random state. Okay.
Good, not. California is a big state. What do you mean it's random?
Oh, I mean, I guess, but you have the whole United States left over.
Yeah.
I would say, are you giving me options or no? I can just guess.
No options today.
I would say, because you said that, I want to say like 18%.
All right.
If I guessed that right on the money, I would have done a backflip.
The correct answer is 40%.
Wow. I originally thought 31, but I was like, that seems awfully high.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's crazy.
That's crazy.
Huh? Yep. Next one is, what is the average victims for a serial killer? That kind of sounds creepy, but
So like how many people serial killers kill?
yeah.
Well, I think it went from 3 to 2 to be counted as a serial killer. So I guess the lower the better. I would say 3.
It says the average serial killer has 7 victims,
Wow.
but many go undetected for years, sometimes decades.
That's so disturbing.
Yeah, very disturbing. Next one is, what percentage of serial killers are women?
Oh gosh. I feel like I haven't heard many stories and you think I would. I would say, what percentage? 15.
15%, huh?
I feel like that's still high.
It's a pretty good guess, actually, but it's
What's the
incorrect.
answer?
The answer is, women make up less than 10% of serial killers, and their motives often differ from men, usually more practical than sadistic.
I'm gonna just straight to the point.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Which
Less
is
than
normally
10. Okay.
not the case in real life.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, normally women are very not logical. Just kidding. Women are
Wow.
great. All right, the last one is just a fact. I'm gonna say that kind of goes with what we just talked about.
Okay.
It says about 1 in 5 homicides in the U.S. are considered no known motive cases.
That's actually shocking to me.
I know, me too. I mean, this is ChatGPT. Maybe they're wrong, but yeah.
1 in 5 seems
Well,
more than I would guess.
I'm sure that is a lot to do with gun violence, like gang members and stuff. Like, there's no known motive, but someone was shot. But the ones we were going over was like a little different. So
Right.
I'm sure it all kind of goes into the same bucket, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe gang violence is the motive. I don't know. But yeah.
Good point.
So, could be wrong. I don't know. But
Still interesting.
GPT says so.
And I chose ChatGPT, unfortunately, with everything I have. That is crazy. Well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
That
no
was
problem.
I feel like I learn a little bit of something every week, so it's interesting for me.
Yeah, you were wrong on every single question.
Thank you. I feel like everyone was wrong. I'm curious what other people's answers would have been.
Yeah.
So, anyways,
us know.
well, yes. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. We'll be back next Wednesday with another episode of Siblings in Crime. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.